WCS will look after one province. USD and other stuff will look after one or two provinces, depending on the unit.
They have the same framework.
We have some common, some standard framework or some how we work with communities. There are some variations, but there are a lot of things that we agree with, how we engage clients.
And you also have like a conservation trust fund.
That is, we...
Okay, sorry, I got to get in here again.
You're very unpopular, you know.
I know.
We have
The thing is, there's a guy that's going to be even more popular because he's in a scary black suit and he said he's going to throw us out at 1 o'clock. So we're going to move on to the next thing, which is not there. The next part on our sheet is resources. So we've done some great sharing. I think hopefully we've got some good ideas. And the next thing we're going to do is talk about some resources that we might know about, and we'll share about those resources. And we'll write that down. Everyone will write 1 or 2 resources that we hear about on the sheet. Then we'll come back into a group. And, well, actually, sorry, we'll report from our groups very quickly, and then we'll come back into a group. Okay? So I'm going to have to give you 5 minutes on this.
You can be as popular by the minute.
Speak rapidly.
So we talked a lot about a lot of the challenges, right? But we're supposed to be getting some best practices out of this.
I want to speak to the enforcement. We focus more on compliance. Compliance in the community to ensure that the people are safe and have an input into it, because that is the key to them following the rules. Yes. So compliance, and once the plan is the areas are demarcated, they actually have a ceremony where pastors, chiefs will come and bless the areas, and they will actually go to the fishing areas, the reefs, they pray over, and these are the things that brings back the sacredness of the plant. If any of the people in the village will break that, then they're not only breaking the village rule, but they also...
In the management plan, do you include in natural resources management plan, or only, or include the social and economic as well?
No. The management plan is more a community management. Community management plan is not only, even though marine area management is one, we also look at other practices. Governance for one village, land use practices, impact some marine areas as well. So it's more integrated management plan, including income generation. I'm speaking this afternoon, for one.
The 130 section, 230 section. Yeah. Okay. So we need a couple of resources as well.
Yes, I think focusing on compliance within the community, within the area that they have influence over.
Very obvious as well, but having partners is kind of vital as well.
Does money go from the central government?
That's the long-term goal. They have provided government offices paying their staff.
How about you? Does money go to your group to help you manage your resources, or are you getting central government money?
A lot of our money comes from the government. We're trying to negotiate fee for service where we work with a range of programs and we're slowly starting to do more and more government stuff for a fee. And we're trying to negotiate with the government with the new part of the background authority to give a percentage of tourism comes to us. Not yet. We're still fighting for that. And a lot of
Thailand, we have 5% from the entrance fee revenue from the national park, but it's really different. And the community complain a lot. But in Australia, I don't think that you have a corruption problem, but in Thailand you have a lot of
that's debatable.
And so that you have a top, really. You better than
In terms of financing, my home market is just a province of 17 activities. And what we've done is was like an agreement both goes into the island and also flight company. Dollars out of their those the moment it's still in agreement, very close to being and people are willing, both tourism and local. This is our future. $1.
right now, I try to on the island that I'm involved with, right now we try to negotiate with the oil companies because right now there are many oil companies come around to get gas petroleum around the three islands that Singapore just got now. It's a famous island network, right? We try to negotiate with the oil companies to provide us the conservation trust fund because in case they have any like a leaking oil or something that because if something happens, the tourism in that area is very important for Thailand.
Okay, I'm going to jump in again. Sorry, guys.
Community capacity right from the start. Then the sustainability.
So if we could all sort of face this way.
So many of you being his sister.
When you get out, like temporary home.
Temporary.
You know, cold work. Yeah,
Okay, so I want to hear from maybe two of you. I'm sorry to have to push the time so fast. Real quick, so I just want an example of a best practice or a good idea that we heard in your discussions. Something new. From one of the group reporters or from anyone else. Anyone? Yeah, Kim, go ahead.
Just a moment from the
Okay, our group had members from Chile, Papua New Guinea, Costa Rica, India, and Comoros. Argentina, sorry. As well as Argentina. Some of there was lots of discussion, and of course we had examples ranging from the Pacific, where there's strong community organization and community ownership of the marine resources and the territories, right over to Chile and Comoros, where there's a very strong government ownership and less support towards the communities. Probably one of the highlights, which is not exactly best practice, but obviously community rights and ownership are a very strong factor in determining the success, and that also relates to the appropriate community involvement. But one thing that was highlighted by all the participants was that it's vital for the community needs and priorities to be the driver of the process. That the objectives have to be clear, and have to be clear to the community and set by the community and brought into by the community. This is the fundamental basis for local management. Once you start mixing other people's objectives in there, then there's no reason why communities would put the effort in that's required. Another key point that was brought up was in terms of financing, that in fact money is almost a distraction, and it's not the vital ingredient. The vital ingredient is the ideas, the objectives that the community sets. Money can actually erode or detract from the objectives of the project. And that's a very rough summary of the key points that we can.
Great, thanks you. Anyone else?
So in our group we had people from Vanuatu, Grenada, Solomon Islands, and Kenya, and we talked about all sorts of different things. Like it sounds like this group talked about the importance of having a bottom-up, stakeholder-driven approach to setting up your LMNAs and working within this already existing structure. So if NGOs are going to come in, and there was a lot of talk about how important NGO support has been in providing training, educational information, and those kinds of things, but that needs to happen within the existing structures that are already there, and community champions were talked about as being a vital part. Some of the forms of financing and alternative livelihoods talked about tourism, aquaculture, things such as sea moss farming. That was something that came up. Getting people who used to fish into monitoring programs and using diving. And some of the topics that came up with enforcement and conflict resolution, and working within the systems that are already there. So we're working within the existing justice system, rather than trying to create another system that people are already comfortable with. And one challenge is finding the funding for enforcement. So some people are talking about different creative ideas to how do we get wardens and how do we pay for them.
Great, thank you so much. So the next two groups, let's move, and I'd like you to share resources. So that section of the discussion. Al, you want to start with the third group?
Okay, just very briefly, we had representatives from South Africa, Madagascar, Vietnam, and Fiji in our groups. There was a strong feeling that in some contexts LMMAs scale virally, rapidly. It's a movement, and it can happen overnight. We can see this explosive growth, whereas in others it can take 10 years to create one LMMA. So if it's going to work, it will work, and often it doesn't really require much of a push. We felt that whenever resources were available in a country should be used and can be used. Film, radio, social marketing. Maybe I should mention RARE, who are here today, provide social marketing services for NGOs and community groups working on community-based marine conservation. So good ideas spread fast was the conclusion of our group, and that resources weren't necessarily needed to help replicate LMMAs, but perhaps one of the things that we needed more support in, and this came from WWF and WCS, was support in better understanding the enabling conditions for LMMAs. What are the governance mechanisms that work? What are the institutional and policy and often economic barriers that are preventing this viral spread in some countries, whereas in others they move forward. There's a lovely, I suppose, example that we could draw on from South Africa, where because of such strong national fisheries control, there hasn't been able to be this growth, whereas in East Africa and Kenya we have beach management units which allow for that decentralized governance. So we moved beyond resources and looked more at what are the enabling conditions. We think that needs to be addressed quite seriously. Perhaps I can also just summarize some of the financing activities that were raised. We have examples in our group of aquaculture being used, as well as tourist divers tags, and substantial financing from park services, hotels, fisheries departments, and NGOs. But it was also raised that funding and creating that dependency on per diem culture to participate in these activities can be toxic and can erode the goodwill that these initiatives depend on.
Okay, thanks. We've got 7 minutes. So we're probably not going to be able to have the group discussion we wanted to have here at the end. So I want to hear just from a couple people here. Basically, the question that brought a lot of us to want to do this event is, we know that sharing between communities is valuable. We know that that networking is very valuable, but it's also really expensive to do things like bringing everyone to Korea. It's expensive within countries even to bring people to one place. It can sometimes be even too expensive to bring neighboring communities together regularly. So how can we have sharing on a larger scale more cheaply? And are there ways we can use technology to do that? Do we have to have sharing when we're physically present in the same place? Or are there other ways that we can do that? And also, we've recognized that there are already an incredible amount of great resources to support local management. And so very briefly, I just want to highlight a couple of those resources. One produced by the Secretary of the Pacific Community and the LMA Network is a guide and information sheets for fishing communities. And this is incredible. It's great to hand out to communities. You've got fish, and then you've got, in easy, simple text, descriptions of the species, their habitats and feeding. Most communities know this and it's traditional knowledge. So this is most useful for kids. And then in the back, you've got more about reproductive life cycle and then management options in very simple language. How can you manage crabs? How can you manage groupers? And that sort of starts from traditional knowledge and moves past to practical knowledge. Another resource is at the back of the room. It's a series of handbooks produced by Blue Ventures with generous support from WIOMSA, the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. There's a series of 12 handbooks. They're part explanation and basic science and part comic book. They're great for communities. You put a comic book in a 12-year-old's hands, he's going to sit there and read it, and the same is true if it's a 65-year-old woman. Everybody likes comics. And we've got a sample from the back. We also have some French available. Ask me if you want those. Also on the LMA Network website, there's a great collection of videos. There's great handbooks and guides on everything from community-based monitoring to summaries of best practices, and some of those documents are in the back as well. Also on the Blue Ventures website, we've got a lot of videos, a lot of them created participatorily. So with all of these resources, we're thinking that one of the big barriers is it's spread out. It's not in one place. And so what we'd like to suggest is that we create one place where we can have discussions, we can have sharing, and where we can access all of these resources. And so our solution, proposed solution, is this. So a new website, it's just launched today.